Ya, ada pertanyaan dari Prof Otto ya. Berapa seharusnya yang menjadi konduktor? Silakan. Oke, teman.
Yeah, I see a lot of messages coming in. Thanks. I can see a lot of participants saying, well, it's one, not three or two. I think they have a point, just one. Thanks so much for your one or more, depending on the conditions. Wow, that's an interesting answer. And maybe you can shift to that other question, which ones are the best? Suppose there's, let's say, the musicians are all from Indonesia. And which conductor then is the best? Could it be a lady conductor, male conductor? Should the person be from Indonesia? Or doesn't itu tergantung? Is it depending on something else? What are your views on this? Maybe you can also add your comments, your views in the chat. Yeah, Eugenia, that's a nice answer. The one that understands the piece best, or is the closest to the orchestra members. Yeah. In the Netherlands, a conductor was appointed, one of the best orchestras of the Netherlands, and the conductor is 28 years old. What do you think? Anyone that's capable and understands how to would be awesome. Okay. All right. It's very much about capacities, understanding, feeling what is necessary, having a connection with the orchestra, and then directing. Right. A good leader and knows the piece that's being played musically the best. Yeah, keep that in mind. Yeah, nice answer, Martin. Nice answer. Let's see whether there's another one coming. Otherwise, all right. Thanks so much for your contributions in the chat. On this issue of how to conduct an orchestra, of course, one could stand still, maybe not that wise. There's no directions given to the orchestra, or focus on one group of musicians. That's an option for sure, but then the other musicians are waiting for the directions and start to make music too late, or this leads to a cacophony. And the final option, of course, could be, this is not a secret, many conductors do this, they balance the attention of all groups, and exactly at the time needed, they give directions to some group of musicians. That's a bit of obvious, of course. But now, suppose the Palma goers of Indonesia, there's 2.5 million smallholders. Indonesia is the biggest producer and exporter of this commodity. This is a big industry in Indonesia. Suppose these palma growers, they are the musicians to make SDG music. So to produce in such a way that many of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are being realized, are being touched upon. It could be environmental ones, could be economic ones on health. Suppose these palm oil growers, they are the musicians. Who should then be the conductor and how to conduct? And I have 4 options for you, and I'd like you to also share in the chat which options you think is the best. Should it be the chair of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, this very large roundtable with 5,000 members coming from all over the world, businesses and NGOs, discussing principles and criteria and the implementation of it? Or should it be the EU and EU countries, the EU being the 3rd largest importer of palm oil? Palm oil, as you know, is consumed widely also in EU and EU countries in so many of products, food products, hygiene, etc., etc. Or should it be the 6 biggest palm oil companies to direct? Well, sometimes it's the musician or one of the musicians who stand up and act as the conductor. Or should it be the government of Indonesia to act as the conductor, to set regulations and policies in tune, in sync, and to contribute to the SDGs, and the palm oil growers to contribute to the SDGs? What do you think? Please, maybe you can share in the chat. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Firna, thank you so much. That's a nice name, Firna Kerim. The government of Indonesia must be the conductor. Number 1 says seorang. I choose number 4, Yuna. Nurmala 4, the government of Indonesia. Sandy says 4, Mohammed Reski as well. Okay, I think it's 4, says Lulu. Right? Quite some say 4. All right. All right, thanks. There's quite some people saying 4. Masuk akal. And I'm happy with your your participation and contribution, because I've also prepared something where indeed the government of Indonesia is the conductor. So this picture puts the government of Indonesia in the center, and as the conductor, not just for the palm oil growers, but also to see to it that their ways of producing contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. But I've added the other options as well. Why? Because time and again, these other players also want to be the conductor or claim to be the conductor. Through their regulations, they direct the orchestra, the palm oil growers, and I'll come to that later. Let's take the government of Indonesia, well, as the conductor, and then see what are the challenges of this conductor. It's interesting also to just one thing before we go into the different challenges, to mention that bakar, the oil that you use in Indonesia, to produce food, it's widely used. But there's in the Netherlands, for instance, advertisements on margarine, tanpa minyak, so without palm oil. So consumers or consumer bodies, they come with different ideas also. But let's continue. By palm oil, the EU and EU countries, and the big palm oil companies as well. So the palm oil growers, but the orchestra basically is somewhat larger. And that's a challenge for the government of Indonesia very much. So this is basically the act of conducting. The government of Indonesia, so much concerned with the palm oil growers for different reasons, but also has to see how to get the provincial governments and the district governments implementing national policies. And the government of Indonesia also has to orchestrate or respond to the RSPO as an organization and standard. And the same goes for the EU and the EU countries. And finally, the 6 biggest palm oil companies as well. So this is how orchestration looked like, in my view. I'm a political scientist, meaning that I'm studying a lot governance issues, so steering. So in ordinary terms, orchestrating, steering society, orchestrating. Now, the remainder of the presentation looks as follows. I will just briefly present the commitment at the highest level to SDGs and sustainable palm oil in Indonesia, and then discuss 5 challenges for the government of Indonesia as a conductor. The commitment to the SDGs gets very high support. So it's through a INPRES, the presidential regulations, that there's a strong commitment of Indonesia, the government, to implement and also to achieve sustainable development goals. This was done in 2017. And in the field of palm oil, the government uses different policy instruments to try and promote sustainable palm oil. Interestingly, quite some of them started before the government or the president decreed his commitment to the SDGs. But what one can see is in later documents, there's strong connections being made by the government to these instruments to say that each of them contributes to the SDGs. So the IS was supported also with a presidential decree. The forest moratorium, there have been several of them, extended 3 times, also starting in 2011, and confirmed also by presidential decree. And oil, also inviting different ministries to take their share and get engaged in the implementation. Interestingly, or maybe sadly so, in quite some debates in Europe, there's hardly any knowledge about the different measures taken by the government of Indonesia to promote sustainable palm oil. There's little of interest. It's easily overstepped, as it were, and I think that is a pity. This is to show that for sustainable palm oil, but also make an impression and stand strong also internationally. Let's start with the first challenge. to find also support from provincial and district governments, and and also local development. But there's also a downside to it. There's room for interpretation. There's room to twist or even deny national plans. And by and large, we can see that from the national to the regional and the local, it's not always that the national action plan is strictly adhered to. And all kinds of dynamics play a role at either the regional, so much to processes of decentralization, giving so much of mandates to the lower authorities. The second challenge, ladies and gentlemen, is about the community of the government policy. As long as there's tensions or conflict, it's difficult also for Indonesia to make a stand also internationally. And I think the government is very much aware of that. And it tries to seek ways, jalan keluar, also solutions, how to address these conflicts. I've been conducting together with Professor Wart Berenschot and Indonesian researchers a 3-year research in this. And currently we are producing several publications. And we found in that research that in many cases, that 150 in depth, land was taken without consent. So this principles of free, prior, and informed consent was not being acknowledged. And well, of course, if you want to use land for cultivation, for your livelihood, and it's then being taken without consent, I think I myself, I also would protest, like this cannot be true. And another major complaint was that there were problems with profit sharing in the plasma systems. Where the share given to the producers was lower than expected or later given. This is something we cannot deny, put away. The national government, but also provincial and local governments, in my view, have to take this into account and not run away. They are not, but it's a difficult situation. And I'm curious also about your views on this. I'm wondering whether the omnibus law is a step forward or a step back in this connection. It was ratified not long ago. It was clearly meant to help business getting licenses more easy, or the producers, the procedures for that. And according to one source, also offering a grace period of 3 years to apply for the proper paperwork. So to have a redesignation of the forest that companies reportedly are illegally occupying to a non-forest designation. So I think the omnibus law is super interesting, but a major question when we are discussing also impact on green business or the contribution to the SDGs. Is it SDG proof? May very much help to overcome a lot of paperwork for business. But a big question is whether this is indeed SDG proof. And sooner or later, I think the government or researchers have to come with answers to that. The third challenge, is about this relationship with the RSPO as a standard and organization. In my view, the challenge is to define a constructive relationship. There have been times where the RSPO and also the government of Indonesia were battling a bit about standards and what standards the global one of the RSPO or the national one of the government of Indonesia is best or should be leading. But by and large, what the two share is their vision of sustainable palm oil and making sustainable palm oil the norm for the global market. So they're really friends in terms of vision, but find it difficult to develop a constructive relationship. And just a brief, established 2004, registered under Swiss law. And as I said, with this vision of transforming markets to make sustainable palm oil the norm. Well, this could also be the vision of the government of Indonesia, whether the coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or first place agriculture. The membership is large, 5,000 companies from all over the world, from all kinds of sectors. And as you know, Indonesia belongs to the top two. Basically, it's the number one in this field. But what we see is that in terms and the traders, which are many of them non-Indonesian or based outside Indonesia, that form the largest share, and it's mostly also non-Indonesians. So it's a, let's say, a foreign conductor. It has a feeling for the sector very much, but it's a foreign conductor. And interestingly, the RSPO and ISPO, they are a bit of lookalikes. There are differences, but I've listed here the RSPO principles. I'm not going to read them one by one, but what I try to show you in this picture is that the principles of the ISPO, they look like the RSPO. So one could say the RSPO and the ISPO, or the principles, they want the same. They have the same idea. They have a people, planet, profit idea when looking at palm oil. One could say enfant la lettre, before the term was really booming. They have an SDG philosophy, both, which is super interesting. And this picture shows that indeed the principles of the RSPO match with quite some of the SDGs. Maybe not all, but a considerable number. So the RSPO, one could say, in terms of principles and criteria, is SDG proof. Well, which leads to a question. If both the RSPO as a foreign conductor and the government of Indonesia want to make sustainable palm oil the norm, well, why not take steps towards mutual recognition schemes? The RSPO and the government both strongly adhere to the sustainable development goals. Why not develop one global standard? And I know recently there's been a workshop also organized by the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs to discuss this idea, to have one global standard. And well, with that, there are also technicalities and discussing the development towards an integrated certification scheme. So maybe at some point in time, there can be two conductors to orchestrate. They have the same vision, or the RSPO can be a stand-in. I don't know, for the government of Indonesia to act as a conductor. Time and again, I find it surprising that there's not more of collaboration and a race to the top, not to the bottom, but to the top, making palm oil mainstream in the market. So a collaboration between the RSPO and the government of Indonesia and this. Right. We come to the fourth challenge. We're nearly there. We've got 5. And the fourth challenge would be to provide a regulatory framework for self-regulation by big palm oil companies. Now, this seems a bit contradictory. So a regulatory framework for self-regulation. But in my view, never can there be. Well, when we live in a world with governments, that there's full and only self-regulation. There's always a government around, and at least it has to provide the rules of the game for self-regulation, the extent to which palm oil companies can conduct self-regulation. And I'll give you an example of this, an example that supports my argument that I just mentioned, that there's a need for a regulatory framework for self-regulation, which could lead to a win-win situation for both the government and also the big palm oil companies. And the case is from the IPOP. And the IPOP stands for, well, Indonesians like, well, even more than Dutch people. They use many abbreviations. It's the, and IPOP has been much used, but here it stands for Indonesian Palm Oil Pledge. This one, pledge, so a commitment, it was launched at the summit in New York, so outside Indonesia, in September 2014, quite a while ago. And there were 4 very large companies involved. They said Asian Agri, Cargill, Golden Agri Resources, and Wilmar. They said, we commit ourselves to zero deforestation. Okay, talking green business. Ladies and gentlemen, this is really green business. This is the businesses saying, we do not want to slow down deforestation. We commit ourselves to zero deforestation. And a few months later, 2 other big ones joined. So we had 6 companies organizing themselves and committing themselves to zero deforestation. Fortunately, well, in my view, unfortunately, the IPOP was self-disbanded. There were reasons for that. The government of Indonesia was not that happy seeing this initiative, and that the IPOP would be too strong. So, a bit of threatened too much smallholders and weakened smallholders. And the government also felt that the IPOP was ignoring state rule-making authority. Yes, there were reasons to doubt the justification of the IPOP. But the companies, they were not disencouraged to the extent that they stopped with this policy. They cunningly adapted their policy or the name of it. And started to use the term of NDPE very much. And the companies, instead of having a joint exercise, they individually pursued NDPE policy, standing for no deforestation, no peatland, and no exploitation. And, well, ladies and gentlemen, this is so much SDG proof. Here you can see both, environmental SDGs, but also social SDGs, so no exploitation. So my question is, if the NDPE policies are SDG proof, how can the government of Indonesia support these policies? And of course, one of the tools is to provide a regulatory framework for that, or to engage, of course, in with the large companies on the issue of the implementation of NDPE, and to seek how to align their policies and implementation with government regulations, and to well, of course, foster collaboration between provincial and local governments on this, because, well, as you know, the proof is in the eating of the pudding. So at the concession level, there is where the policy has to work. So it means that the government of Indonesia, as a conductor, faces the challenge of having local governments and regional governments sitting together with business on the NDPE policy. I find it a very interesting issue and question. One of my Indonesian PhDs, Ahmad Darmawan, is about to finish his PhD on this topic and defending in October. But there's many more questions to be explored here. I mentioned a few of them. Right, my last challenge for you, economic affairs or foreign affairs, agriculture, working on these challenges, because the government, this public agency, is to play a key role. And maybe this one, the last one for you in the menu, is the biggest challenge. I'm also working on it through research. It's about addressing due diligence legislation of the EU and EU countries. And I'll explain, of course, what is due diligence and how Indonesia could, the government, respond. This provides a table. This provides an overview of the different due diligence regulations of the EU and EU member countries. You see some of them are from the EU, starting 2008 with this EU regulation on illegal unreported undocumented fishing. The Renewable Energy Directive is quite famous. The first one was launched in 2009. At that time, there were not stringent regulations on the import of palm oil. This changed, of course, with the revised EU Renewable Energy Directive, but they provide prescriptions on the import of global commodities. They provide prescriptions on business and what business should do or not do, on what timber to source, and what timber can be imported. And the same goes for conflict minerals. The European Parliament adopted a resolution very recently on corporate due diligence and corporate accountability, 2021. And this will further develop. And at the same time, EU member countries have launched, they all point in the same direction. We want business, our international business, to behave differently. Therefore, the Netherlands adopted this child labor due diligence law. It's only on child labor. It has a limited scope. Norway is focusing more on transparency, the rise and proliferation of the RSPO and other, private initiatives that so much have, set the debate and also, affected also government policy in Indonesia. I think after that, this proliferation provides the new and biggest challenge for the government of Indonesia as a conductor. How to conduct if the EU and EU member countries make these claims so much as conductors or as faraway conductors, foreign conductors, as telecoupled conductors, some scholars say. This is really to give you an idea of the enormous amount and the diversity also, but the scope, the massiveness of the regulations coming from the EU and EU member countries, which will lead to questions and challenges for the government of Indonesia. Due diligence, what is it? Briefly, steps that a company must take to become aware of, prevent, and address adverse impacts. And adverse impacts it's usually understood as impacts in terms of on the environment and in terms of human rights. So it's about the green and the social part of the SDGs, one could say. And this figure is from the OECD. The OECD has been very active in developing, say, guidelines on due diligence. And here you can see 6 steps in due diligence processes. I'm not going to discuss them into detail, but you can see operations, supply chains, and business relationships. And one meaning, in short, companies based in Europe, they are accountable for negative impacts caused abroad by their subsidiaries or suppliers. So the accountability doesn't stop at the border of an EU country or at the EU, but goes beyond that, is extraterritorial. So the companies, they are accountable for negative impacts caused abroad by their subsidiaries or suppliers. So any kind of expert on palm oil knows how complex global value chains in the field of palm oil are, with many subsidiaries and many suppliers. So just think about measuring impact. Who is going to measure that? It says negative impacts. There's no discussion on positive impacts. I showed you in the former slide, there's also this step on offering compensation. How on earth is it going to be organized? So there's many questions for the government of Indonesia as the, I think, main conductor of this orchestra of palm growers, and it has also regulations from Europe. And yeah, the question is, how can or should the government of Indonesia respond? It can ignore, it can say, look, this is Europe and they come with a crazy idea again, or copying, like in a way, maybe the government of Indonesia did in the case of the RSPO, ISPO, collaborating, but then how? The government of Indonesia has not been involved in the design. So what does collaboration mean? Is it then simply the one to implement? Can it protest? But then where and with whom? As I showed you, the European section to make its own noise, as it were. And can the government of Indonesia then agree with EU countries that due diligence legislation is SDG proof? Mind you, ladies and gentlemen, every promoting this due diligence legislation makes a reference to the SDGs, saying that the due diligence legislation is in sync with SDGs. Which makes it difficult to upfront and in a very direct way options of the, let's say, ideal conductor for the orchestra consisting of palm growers. I ask you, which one do you think is the best? Most of you, nearly all, favored the government of Indonesia. This is not just a policy question, but also a question for research. I think in the coming years, a lot of research will be done and has to be done on this matter. Yeah, I've come to the end of my presentation. And want to say terima kasih banyak. As you can see from the pictures, research can only flourish through collaboration and developing, sound and long-term relationships with each other. So here you see a picture of different researchers that I've been collaborating with happily. And it's even just a selection. So please remember that only research plans, and also for them, my Indonesian friends, to come to Wageningen in the Netherlands to discuss things. So thank you so much for listening.
Oke, mari kita berikan
Yeah.
applause. Give applause to
Oh,
Profesor
so,
Otto ya. Give your thumbs up. Silakan diberikan reaction, your reaction.
yeah.
Tuliskan. Terima kasih Pak Otto, thank you. I think this is a great lecture ya. How important is the oil palm industry, and it looks like so many conductor will be involved ya. Okay, before question and answer, teman-teman silahkan di question Prof Otto. The IPOP ya, IPOP, is it the initiative of the corporate? I mean, because of the high awareness of the environment. So it looks like the initiative comes. Yeah. How do you look at that situation?
Yeah. Yeah. Very good question. Thanks so much. Yes, it is an initiative. It was an initiative of the big palm oil companies themselves. But yes, we also have to see, the context and the backgrounds of it. Ahmad Dermawan has very much looked into that. We've also published one or two articles on this, and negative impact. So it was clearly an attempt at that time in New York to show the world, look, you can blame us all the time, but we have plans as well. We also understand that we cannot continue with deforestation all the time. We want to. So they want to also make an impression on the ones that critiqued the companies, very often NGOs. So many environmental NGOs, they applauded the initiative. They were very, very happy. And interestingly also, that's another kind of result of the study of Ahmad Dermawan. Whenever there's complaints from NGOs, also from Indonesian NGOs, monitoring particularly the RSPO companies, whenever there's a complaint, they take up the complaint to investigate what is the matter. And then I cut a long story short, but then engaging with their suppliers or subsidiaries on how to address a problem. So it is not true that companies hide away. So they're triggered by NGOs. They have committed at that time to the zero deforestation. And whenever there is a critique, today in this world of social media, you cannot hide.
Yes.
So that was also interesting. Of course, also for these companies, it's not easy. So we know that there's different layers: the national headquarters, the provincial, and at the concession level. There will be. To us, this is still a black. But you know, Professor Ujang, that is also a bit of market intelligence. So how to do research with business in a both transparent way, but also giving respect to the market intelligence of a company. That's a challenge. That's the challenge, because as soon as there's negative publicity, you know that, then this negative publicity is being used by a Dutch NGO.
Yes,
and it's spread in the news. So for companies, they also face a dilemma. How transparent do we want to be? When we would face the risk that is being spread all over the world. So even this, I think many of these companies are serious. You know, they want to make a change. They want to address the issue, but they are afraid that there's one tiny negative publicity that it's being, which is unfair, I think. But it's interesting to see what are the initiatives among business That's I think very, and we use also theoretical terms for that, corporate political action. So that the CPA literature is that, which investigates this matter.
Yeah, thank you, Prof.
Yeah,
Otto.
I'm happy to take
Yeah,
questions.
silakan.
Yeah, also
Bapak
from,
Ibu, student, you want to raise question, write in chat room, or you can just directly. Terima kasih Pak Setiawan Sunitono, ini our faculty staff member. He attend the lecture. Pak Setiawan, mungkin bisa menambahkan. You can add, please. Yeah, still mute. Yeah, you can on.
Very much, Professor Otto, for the lecture. And and I don't know, you are now in Indonesia, in Wageningen, right?
Sekarang saya di rumah saja. Karena universitas tutup. Jadi saya kerja di rumah. Tidak apa-apa, ada hubungan dengan bapak dan ibu saya. Jadi, tapi saya sekarang di Belanda, di Wageningen.
As I know, it is in Netherlands now is more warm than in Indonesia.
Begini.
No, but I like actually to question some basic assumptions. In many discussions on palm oil. First of all, that palm oil agribusiness and industry to be conducted, as a kind of a kind of a managerial way. The second basic assumption is that the government of Indonesia, for example, is position itself above all parties, and that the government can take the role as a conductor of palm oil, for example, palm oil industry. Conductor means that it stands above all the parties, like that, for example. And related to that is the basic assumption that the government is like a one voice, one monolithic unit, which is from national to local, which is in Indonesia is very questionable. You hear national policies on palm oil, but at the ground level, what happened is quite different. Economy. Indonesian economy is now Indonesian palm oil is now #1 in the world. But as you say, Indonesia itself is not the conductor of this palm oil agribusiness and industry. Industry is in Singapore and in Malaysia. We are actually like in the colonial time, just the plantation. And those are the basic assumptions that I questioned. And I like to remind us the weakness of economy that is based on too much on one product, like the banana republics in Latin America. And then one comment is on the commitment of the big actors in the agribusiness and industry of palm oil, for not to cut new forests anymore. I'm afraid that this will not limit the expansion of palm oil. So the palm oil will expand through intrusion in local agriculture land. And that means taking land from the local farmers. And what does this mean for the local economy, but also for the national economy? Those are questions that I have in my mind. Thank you very much.
Well, these are a lot of questions, huh? And I think maybe I can pick some. Thanks so much for your.
But other students can try to look at these questions too. Yeah, just not for you, but for the whole.
So of course, I've on purpose used the metaphor of the conductor, and I'm also so happy to see that most of you agree that the government of Indonesia is the conductor compared to the other ones. And I think this idea of Indonesia just being a plantation, I think that has changed. I think that they really try to orchestrate. They do not accept the terms that are being imposed. So at the same time, I know, I agree with you, Satywan, that this is also a bit of a simplified story, a simplified metaphor, because even talking Jakarta, there's 4 to 8 ministries engaged with palm oil. So who at the national level is also the conductor. And so there's an issue of collaboration, but also there, I think time has changed. I think my general observation is that palm oil used to be very much in the corner of the Ministry of Agriculture, rightly so. It's completely understandable. But now economic affairs and foreign affairs are taking the lead. I think these 2 ministries, they are the conductors now. And does it mean that also the problems with expansion and intrusion with smallholders has disappeared? I don't think so. I'm not saying that. What I so much appreciate of the latest 5-7 years, that the government really tries to be a conductor and tries to see that, okay, what is happening there at smaller level? Okay, how can we manage? And not is running away. So in a way, and that's one of my hobbies, hobby horses. I so much hope and wish that the government of Indonesia becomes a very modern new conductor that can play can play and orchestrate different musicians, meaning the European Union, meaning the smaller associations, meaning the big companies. I think that is what I wish, but also want to study. I'm also a researcher. I'm curious about these developments. That's a bit of what I could say to you. No, it's not like Indonesia has no problems at all with palm oil. It's not true. But how to manage, how to address, how to collaborate with the big business, how to collaborate with the EU or address their kind of, again, quite, well, neo-colonial terms. I think that is a mistake. It will lead to problems. It will lead to new clashes. And this is not the way forward, in my view. All right.
Yeah,
I see a question. So, thank you, Pak Setiawan.
Thank you, Pak Setiawan. Yeah, thank you. Terima kasih, Pak Setiawan. Ini there is one more question from Bapak Wicaksono. You can explain directly, Pak.
Yeah, let me see.
Can you read in the chat room?
Yes, I can read it. I'm trying to find it now. All right. Okay. It should be the conductor, and then let me. All right. Now I see it. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Very good question. Yeah, very good question. Yeah. And right, yeah. I think your question, it's on the due diligence and the impact on the small-scale farmers, and how the government of Indonesia best approach the issue. And at the same time, yes, there's this issue regarding the EU Red 2 still going on. Super good question. Yeah. That are the questions that we need to research. First of all, asking also smallholders and smallholders associations how they would react and respond. This is also a bit of a technological question. It's a governance issue, but also a technological question. But thanks for raising, Pak Gunawan, the question. It shows how little has been thought, and the thinking through of due diligence legislation and the implications for small business, and it's not there. It's not there. So the first thing you and I can say to the legislators and also to scholars, very interesting idea. but do you know that there's 2.5 million smallholders in Indonesia, and how on earth do you think they can contribute also to the implementation of the due diligence legislation? And mind you, suppose as some study shows that nearly half of the smallholders they do not meet certain criteria, or they contribute to environmental problems. What would then be the effect of the due diligence legislation? Of course, we can sense that there could be a similar impact as compared to the Renewable Energy Directive. No import of palm oil for making biofuels. And then the question is whether the due diligence legislation aggravates that. So your point is super good. Raise this point in discussions, get it on a research agenda, and make EU legislators and scholars and policymakers aware that they have simply ignored a very, very it's outrageous. It's a big mistake. So now with the Renewable Energy Directive, things were very, in a way, clear, certainly with the revised one, because it contains stipulations on palm oil. What will happen with the due diligence legislations? Will there be follow-up regulations for different